Okay, I would like to thank everybody for attending the session today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Ritzko, Security Analyst with SOS, and we're here to talk today about assessing security posture in your unit. So, and why would we really be discussing that topic today? What's the importance of that? I know we get caught up a lot of times in the day-to-day, putting out the fires, things like that, but security has really been important for quite some time now, and it's only going to continue to get more important as we... Apologies, we're just working on the mic a little bit for our Adobe listeners. Is that better? Yes. Okay, great. So it's only going to get more important going forward, security, so we really need to try to take a step back sometimes. You know, we'll get caught up in everything. Take a step back, take a good look at our environment, and try to regroup, reprioritize where we really should be focusing and putting our efforts, right? So most of you, or many of you may know that in a former life I worked at the Hazleton campus for a long time. So I've been in the trenches. I feel your pain. All right, I know the constraints and barriers that a lot of you are facing. So, but then again, I just had back surgery a couple months ago, so maybe I'm not the best person to be talking about posture, but we'll just, that's either here nor there. So let's just dive right into this. And before we do that, I just, for the folks in the room here, apologize for the temperature. It's pretty stifling in here. So hopefully nobody passes out. At least if you're dozing, I won't take it personally. It's about 78, 79 degrees in here, so it's pretty toasty. But when we get started here, I want to just do a quick poll to see what you guys think are maybe the most important thing that you really would want to focus on. So let's go ahead and bring the first poll out, and our Adobe Connect folks can go ahead when that comes out and tally up your answers. So for those of you in the room here, just a quick show of hands from the list up here. Hopefully you can see that pretty well. Anybody in here think that firewalls is probably the most important thing to focus on? How about networks? System management? Okay, one maybe. How about account management? Data management? All right, a couple more hands. Inventory? How about user awareness? Okay, a couple people there. Good. Excellent. Yeah, our Adobe users are still chiming in. So it looks like we're pretty scattered. Most people have seemed to think user awareness. And I would go ahead and venture to say that really it depends. It depends on your environment, okay? There are some units out there who do a really good job at user awareness, but maybe not so much in other areas. When I first looked at this list, my immediate reaction is data management, mostly because, and we'll talk about this, but mostly because that's really where we're putting a lot of focus and effort right now, is taking a look at the data, trying to protect the data, okay? But there are some units out there who are also doing a pretty good job with that. So really, it just depends on where you're at. And the important thing is going to be to really take a good look at all of these areas and then try to reprioritize and see where maybe you need to put some more effort. All right, so we can get rid of that. Thank you. And where do we start? How about inventory, right? So it's difficult. It's really difficult to effectively manage your environment if you don't know what's out there. So that's going to be one of the first things, if you don't have a good handle on that you really need to find out what you have out there on your network. There are tools like Nmap, Wireshark. Those are all free tools that you can use to try to assist you with that. If you're not sure how to use those, you can certainly look up references or just ask the security office. We're always willing to try to provide guidance in how to more effectively use tools like that. So you want to find out what's out there. Some units will use software like Microsoft Access databases to keep track of their equipment, or use things like barcoding in some cases to help with inventory. And really the system is not as important as really keeping an eye and determining and ratcheting down on who can actually modify the data, right? And is it accurate? Those things are really, really more important in this realm, okay? If you have too many cooks in the kitchen, it's really difficult to try to keep your inventory up to date. It's going to be all over the place, right? So you really should limit who has the ability to modify your inventory, okay? Maybe most of the IT folks in your area, it's okay for them to have read access, but should they all have modify? Probably not. That should be very few people that have that designation. And if the IT folks out there that only have read access, if they're the ones putting the machines out and bringing machines into the office and sending them to salvage, things like that, you should have a good procedure in place so that those folks can make sure that they get that information disseminated to the people who can actually make the modifications in the database. So that'd be a good way to try to keep it updated, keep it clean. And of course, trying to now and then audit the inventory for accuracy. That's always a good thing to do. So it depends on how often you might want to do that. If you want to do it, I would say at least annually, but you can do it more often than that. But you want to try to do some spot checks and maybe once a year even go through a deeper dive and do some serious checking to see if things are out of whack. How about firewalls? Most units are really doing a much better job in that area. We've put a lot of focus on firewalls in the past several years. So a lot of us have border firewalls in some way. We maintain it. But are you using desktop firewalls? Are you implementing that across your unit? Maybe not. Where could you see the benefits in that though, right? If you are, so if you think about that for a minute, enabling the desktop firewalls on all of your clients is maybe not such a hard thing to manage if you're like in a central domain structure, Active Directory, and you can really push out those changes through group policies. So if you're doing things like that and pushing policy down all the clients, then it's really not so difficult to actually implement a firewall-wide policy on your clients, right? So that's probably something you want to think about if you're not doing that. That's a good avenue to go down. Some of the other benefits, if you think about that as well, is if you do happen to get a compromised machine, so that's already inside the network. The border firewall is not going to help you out a whole lot in that regard. So now that machine then could potentially target a lot of other machines on the inside of the network. But if you have your local firewalls enabled and you have a good rule set for those, that could really stave off a lot of that malicious traffic trying to hit the other machines inside the network. So another good reason to really think about putting an internal firewall on all the clients. Also, if you are maintaining your own, that's fine. But if you haven't looked at the TNS service in a while, these services, central services, are really getting a lot better. So it's always a good recommendation to have a spot check on that and just see where they're at with their service, because you might actually be able to really save yourself some resources, right? Time is precious anymore. And we're not getting any more help in our areas, okay? You're not getting any more staff. So where you put your time is vital. So if you don't have to worry about updating the firewall, things like that, TNS will do those things for you, right? So it's always good to just take a look and see if maybe those services might now be a good time to implement those in your area. Might be helpful. What about outgoing rules? A lot of units don't put a lot of stock in setting outgoing rules on their firewalls. Every layer that you add of security can really help out a lot. So why not do that? At least think about it. In the grand scheme of things, that's probably not the most important component if you're not doing it already. But certainly it's something you can do. Something you definitely should do, though, is audit your rules on a regular basis. Take a look at those. Do you have any procedures in place before you put a new rule in there? So if a faculty or staff member needs to have access to something new, how does that happen? Do you have a good procedure in place? Do you make them fill out a form? Do you find out how long they're going to need it? If they only need it for a short period of time, then maybe you want to mark that down in your calendar, whatever. Set a date for the rule to disable at a certain time, or actually set a reminder for yourself to just go in and remove it after a certain date. That way you keep things cleaned up, right? And it's always good to go through and check your rule set every now and again just to make sure there's stuff in there that if you don't need it, why have that hole in the firewall, right? So keep things clean, keep things organized. It just goes a long way. Question in the room.
Chris, you mentioned outgoing rules, and I know we spend a lot of time looking at incoming things, but if we're not doing a lot of content, data content, looking at that going out, which is what a lot of companies do, can you give me an example of some rules that you, a rule or two that you would put on outgoing traffic?
Okay, so the question in the room is really to try to come up to give an example of where you would want to use outgoing rules, because some units don't really care too much about monitoring the data traffic going, or don't have a need to monitor the traffic going out. So an example of where you may want to set outgoing rules, one, it just keeps the traffic cleaner. If, for example, you also have a machine that does get compromised, having those outgoing rules maybe blocks a lot of things that machine then cannot communicate back out to the malicious hosts. That's another good example. And so in that regard, I would think, just in general, trying to keep the traffic to a minimum and clean and things, just adding an extra layer. Again, as you mentioned, it's probably not a highest priority thing, but if you can add it, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, well, we see stuff all the time in security going out. So, right, that's what we do. We block that stuff when we see what's happening. But in your case, it's really a personal preference. I don't know that it's really, like I said, really vital for you. When you start monitoring and analyzing the traffic that's actually leaving, then maybe you want to take a closer look at what your operations are doing. And that would be the first thing to try to determine, well, what actually are we doing in our unit? What kind of stuff are we processing? Where is it actually going? And if you're actually sending out confidential data, restricted data, then yeah, maybe you do want to ratchet things down tighter just to make sure that stuff is not leaving or going out on those ports. So when I was at Hazleton, we implemented outgoing rules on the border firewall and even to systems at University Park. So we locked it right down to the port that's needed for the clients to get to out here at University Park. So both incoming and outgoing, the port numbers, the IP address ranges, everything. So we locked it down as tight as we could, just so that's one less thing we had to worry about. I hope that answers your question. Good. Okay, so what about some other features? Is anybody running VPN service on their firewall? Maybe you have that capability, maybe you don't. How do you handle, though, when your users are somewhere off campus and they want to remote desktop back into your unit? Do you just allow them to remote back in? Do you not allow it at all? But if you do allow it, if you have that capability, it's always good to set up that extra layer of security. So set up a VPN tunnel. Have them use a VPN connection before they can actually remote desktop back into the campus or unit. What about IPS? Anybody using intrusion prevention modules? Some people are. That takes kind of a deeper dive into not just your standard traffic going in and out, but it takes a closer look at a lot of the signatures of the traffic. And what about app filtering, content filtering, things like that? A lot of the firewalls, most firewalls today probably have the capabilities now, and some units are actually starting to implement this app filtering. So, for example, in some cases, we still have a lot of users who are responding to phishing messages. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to have the firewall kind of step in there when someone clicks on one of those links in their email and it pops up with a message, either blocking them from going there or saying, hey, you know, are you sure you really want to go out to this site? This looks like it might be something that is suspicious and maybe trying to capture your credentials. So we can maybe start doing some things like that with those kinds of modules. All right, networks. A little bit of the same kind of thing here. Maintenance. Are you maintaining your own networks? Is TNS maintaining your networks? It's okay either way, but if you're maintaining it yourself, you know, maybe you want to take a look at some point back and see if maybe TNS maintenance isn't a more viable option for you to try to free you up to do other things. VLANs. Are we using VLANs? I'd venture to say that most units probably are starting to use those more, but not all. We run into some units that have a pretty flat network, and that's really not a good thing, because then all of your traffic, academic, administrative, any stuff in the DMZ, test boxes that faculty are using, it's all going across the same network, and that's not a good thing. So you really want to think about, if you're not using VLANs, you should be segmenting all that stuff, all right, separating all that traffic, and using firewall rules, things like that, both internal and the border, to try to keep a lot of that traffic going where it needs to go. What about shared subnets? You run into that a lot at University Park, even at the campuses, where you might be in a small unit and you're sharing a subnet or you're sharing a switch with other people in the building. What do you do about that? Right? So it's good to try to segment that traffic. Get all that stuff on VLANs. You should have your own private network spaces there for all of your devices, and you should separate those as well, right? So what about locking down the ports themselves by MAC address? If somebody really wants to get into the network, they're going to find a way. But stuff like locking the ports by MAC address, that keeps the honest people honest. So a lot of times, if you have students in your environment, you know, maybe they are going to poke around and see what they can do, and maybe they won't think about trying to spoof a MAC address or something to get through on that connection. So it's just another thing that you can do to really try to ratchet things down. All right, on to system management. So you also want to think about, what are you running in your environment? Server-wise, desktop-wise. Are you running physical servers? Are you running virtual servers? Maybe you're running both. Are you using Hyper-V? Are you using VMware? How about thin and zero clients? A lot of folks are starting to use some of those things. And what's running on those servers? You need to take a serious look at that, or you should take a serious look at that. What's the purpose of that server? Why are you running it? Is it just because it was always there? Well, maybe you don't need to run it. If you don't need to run it, you should really take it down. It's one less exploit point. And the ones that you are running, are you keeping them patched? Are you keeping them updated routinely? You may think that's pretty straightforward, but that's not always the case. So you want to make sure you take a look at that and see how you're handling that stuff. Or maybe some of the servers that you are using, depending on what you're using it for, might be available as a central service. So you want to think about that too. Maybe you don't have to run it at all. Maybe you need that service, but you don't have to run it. You want to think about that too, right? Are you using VM hosting at all out here centrally? Something to think about. What about mobile devices? Tablets, laptops, phones, all of that stuff. How are we handling that? Boy, that's a tough one, right? It's always tough to keep those guys updated. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Printers, HVAC stuff, room access controls like card swipes, card fobs, stuff like that. If you have any of those in your environment, how are you controlling those things? How are you managing those things? We are seeing way too many printers and other devices like that on public IP space. Why? Why is that stuff on public IP space? Most of it, I mean, there may be a reason here or there where something might need to be, but the majority of that sort of equipment doesn't need to be on public IP space. So really, you should think about trying to get those things off and put those on their own, again, put those on their own VLAN, their own small private subnet. You can use 192, 168 space if you want, just locally on your network. Printers, they can talk to a print server. Maybe the print server is the one that has the extra network interface that will then talk to the University Park servers out here, or if they need internet access for whatever reason, the controllers maybe, they're the ones that would have that internet access, and they have more security built into them because they usually have some sort of operating system that you're running off of. So you can lock those down with firewalls, things like that, whereas the devices themselves generally don't have too much security built into them. Okay, so we really should start thinking about getting that stuff off of public IP space, and it's on its own little subnet and VLANs. All right. Again, system management. This is another one of those areas. Are you guys maintaining all of this yourself, or are you using some central services, or both? Sysman and CLM services for those who have student computer labs. Those are maybe services that you want to look into if you haven't done that in the past, right? You should always really be reevaluating your options and looking at what makes sense. Can you go to something central that makes more sense? It's going to save you in the long run. Less you have to worry about, the better, right? How quickly are you deploying your patches? Very important. Right? You need to get those devices patched as soon as possible. Stuff like Java, Adobe Flash, we see compromises all the time because those are not updated on machines. What about auditing the actual success of those patches? Right? Are we doing that? Are we doing a good job of that? You might be mass deploying the patches, but did they really get onto all the machines? Were some of the machines turned off? Did some of them fail getting the patch? How do you know? Are you auditing that pretty well? I know at Hazleton, when I was at Hazleton, we actually had a NAC device in place. Not everybody has those kind of devices, but that really went a long way for us because we couldn't rely too heavily on the reporting done by the patch management system. It was good, but it wasn't great. So in our environment, the NAC really served as that fail-safe for us. So every device that went on our network had to talk to the NAC before it actually got on the internet. And the desktops that were always online, they would just regularly pull the NAC to make sure that they were still compliant with the policies we set. But laptops, things like that, when they come back on campus, they plug into the network or go on the network, they immediately would check in with the appliance to see if the policy is being matched. And if they weren't, so for example, if we said, well, every device out there on the campus now should have Flash version whatever. If it doesn't, it would automatically kick that device off onto a quarantined VLAN. And the user would get a message saying, hey, Adobe Flash, you don't have network access because Adobe Flash is outdated. Call the help desk or whatever. And then we could just jump on the server and push out the patch for them right away. So if you've got a good deployment system in place, something like that worked out real well for us. Because if we got a couple of those phone calls, we could just quickly push it out there and they'd be on their way. Minimal downtime for the users. And that was our way of making sure that our machines were getting the updates, and if they weren't getting on the network. But if you don't have something like that, then you have to do the best job you can with the reporting tools that you have and however you're deploying your patches. And what about vulnerability scanning? That's another important thing. The auditors are going to ask you about that one too, right? So how frequently are you scanning your devices for vulnerabilities? And when you find vulnerabilities, what are you doing with that? Are you remediating? Are you actually following through and trying to fix those? A lot of units are starting to use the new Security Center service that's available through the security office. And the nice thing about that, of course, for those of you who haven't used it yet, the nice thing about that is it's really on-demand. It's an on-demand service. You can go in and scan your devices whenever you want. You don't have to have a security analyst involved with setting up a day and time when the scans happen. You can schedule them on your own, and you can do them as often as you want, right? So you don't have to wait and just satisfy the quarterly scan, the audit scans, right? You can scan those as often as you want. Now, some of the results, maybe the low ones are not quite as important or not as relevant for what you're doing, but certainly anything that comes back as high or critical, yeah, you really should be jumping on those right away and trying to figure out what's going on there. Okay? All right, data management. So this is really where we're starting to put a lot of focus, a lot of attention on data management. So we've always had this in our mind, but now we need to really start thinking about what data do we have out there? What kind of data is it? How are we protecting it if it's restricted? Okay, this is really going to start coming down the pike soon. Most of you have already heard about DataCat. Hopefully everybody has by now. Okay, and there's some minimum security baselines that are going to be associated with restricted data, things like that. But this is where we're heading. So there's a very big initiative that's going on, and if you haven't started thinking about this, at least it's going to be coming real soon, and we're going to be taking a deeper dive into that because we really need to start focusing on the data. Compromises are going to happen, right? We can't restrict them entirely, even though we'd like to. Sometimes that's going to happen. People are going to find a way in. Vulnerabilities are going to exist, and it's going to happen. But what we have to stop, what we have to eliminate, is the compromises that expose restricted data. Okay, we still have way too much of that going on. So that's why we really need to do a better job of recognizing what's restricted, what's confidential data, and properly protecting it. We need to do a better job with PII scanning, identity finder stuff. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So some of the ways that you can actually start protecting data now. Think about encryption if you're not using it, right? So if you can't stop the faculty right now from taking the data on laptops, or the staff from taking data away from off-site on laptops, things like that, maybe think about encryption. Our office, security office, is offering free encryption service to anyone that's interested. Just go ahead and send us an email if you're not already on that, and we'd be happy to start to get you set up with that. So we have that for the entire university to start using. So think about the laptops or any other devices that might, even if they're desktops behind a locked door, that doesn't mean you can't have a break-in somewhere and that machine gets stolen. So if you're not centrally storing the data in like a network space somewhere that you can control and keep safe, then maybe even the desktops in certain areas you want to put encryption on those, right? Something to think about. I think we're all doing pretty well with file and folder permissions right now. So, for example, if you do have those network spaces, if you have certain departments or certain groups of people in your area that need to access shared files, but you don't want everybody else to see those, right? So how well are you implementing file and folder permissions in your space? You at least want to think about it and take a look. If you want to make sure you're doing a good job there, I would suspect that most of us probably are, but still want to take a look at that. How about data retention? How are we doing with non-PSU hosted services like Dropbox, Google Drive, things like that? That's another big area where there's a lot of buzz going on about that kind of stuff. Where's the data, right? Again, where's the data? Do you have any policies in place for that stuff? Maybe, maybe not. Something to think about. What about backups and storage? Again, the data, where's it going? Are you doing backups for all your users? Or do you leave them to their own to do those things? Are you backing up on network storage, or are you doing it local, or both? Right? Are the users, we've seen some units that the users have no idea if the IT folks are backing up their data. So they take it upon themselves to back it all up on a thumb drive that goes everywhere with them. Wow. Not a good thing, right? If there's a lot of restricted data on there, that's really, really exposed out there. So you want to think about that. You want to start getting that under control. All right. Does that mean you have to block USB devices? No, not necessarily, but you could force maybe something like an encryption policy, for example, so that any USB device they plug in, it can't be used unless it's got encryption on it. And you don't necessarily have to have the software installed outside of your unit everywhere, but if the self-executable on that particular thumb drive or whatever would then be able to run anywhere, so the user could put their password in and decrypt the drive so they can get to those files. Something to think about. How are we protecting the data for people who leave, right? That's probably an issue that a lot of us have. So when people leave the university, what do we do with that data? Hopefully, at least at this point, we hope that you're still involving security in trying to determine if any of that data is needed and not just passing it on to somebody else or taking a look at it yourself. Things like that. Right now, the procedure is to go through security office, and if there's anything that's needed, we'd have to sift through and make sure there isn't any personal stuff given back to the unit. Right? We all try to tell people not to use their Penn State devices, machines for personal things, but it happens. They all do it. So it's important that we still follow those procedures. But in the interim, how are you protecting that data? So while we were still, when I was at Hazleton, the way we used to work that out in the interim is when someone would leave, we would take the whole backup file for that user, and we would encrypt the whole thing, store it on a network share or offline somewhere. But that way, if for some reason that data got out there, it's encrypted, so they're not going to be able to do anything with it. So something to think about in the interim to try to keep it protected if you don't have a better system already. All right, PII scanning or remediation. This is another big one. You would think that we would be well on our way and have this one knocked out since we've been doing it for so many years. But we see way too many machines still with PII on them, still getting compromised. And that stuff's got to change, has to change, right? So how are your operations set up? Take a good look at that. Do you have a good scanning frequency set up? Are you doing it like bi-weekly? A lot of units will do a bi-weekly scan. Are your users actually remediating? Right? Are you checking up? Are you making sure they're remediating? How well are you monitoring the console for your unit? Are you keeping the policies up to date? Are you keeping the clients up to date when they're available? Are you making sure, checking through the results, regularly checking those to see if folks are remediating or not? We often, when we go out to units and talk to them, we talk to the users, we talk to the staff, we talk to the faculty, and in more cases than not, they still have no idea what this identity finder thing really is. And that's pretty sad. I mean, we did a good job years ago, I think, as a group, when this whole thing first started, and we did a mass push out there in all the units, and everybody was getting the bulk of the PII off. But this stuff is coming back, right? Users continue to take in applications or other things. I mean, it's just normal business. So the stuff ends up back on. See a lot of tax returns still on Penn State computers. Imagine that. So this stuff is happening. So we need to continue to be diligent in scanning and making sure users are remediating. And we do still occasionally get the machines that have some of those old class lists from 2000 and 2001, and there's thousands or hundreds of Social Security numbers on there. It is still happening. All right, so that stuff's got to get taken care of. And the user awareness thing, a lot of those users that say they have no idea what Identity Finder does, they'll tell us, yeah, I don't know, this thing just slows my computer down, and so I just close it so I can get back to work quicker. Or they let it run, and then they'll say, but I really don't know what all this means. So they'll just blanket, either ignore everything or just shred everything, and that's not always good either, right? So user awareness, this is one area where we really have to do a better job. And those who are in charge of managing your unit in the console, we need to make sure we're doing a really good job keeping things clean in there, making sure old endpoints are